AAPI Heritage Month, and we're having a fascinating conversation with our guests, Lisa Ling and Jose Vargas.
Yes. One thing that makes me really proud about our show is not only do we educate about race, the things you don't learn in school, but we also debunk headlines that lead really misleading information. Recently, we talked about how it was shared that the Olympics had banned the use of BLM on their platforms, but that's been a long-standing rule in the Olympics, not just something that was declared in Tokyo, Japan, that made it seem like a very Asian versus black thing. And now recently it was reported in USA Today that the extremist group, the Proud Boys, reported receiving almost $100,000 in donations from the Chinese and Chinese American communities a month before the Capitol riots. And this is a story that I know got a lot of people's attention. And I'm curious, what do you guys think about this reporting and these headlines that can really bring minority groups against each other with false headlines and false facts?
Well, when I saw that, of course, it was really disconcerting. But first of all, we don't know if it's true. I mean, just because someone has a Chinese surname or puts a Chinese surname on a donation doesn't mean that it is actually from someone who's Chinese. But even if it is true, we're talking about maybe 1,000 people who may have donated to the Proud Boys. The Asian American diaspora is 23 million strong. And so this is a tiny fraction of the Asian American population, if this is even true. And that's why this is so upsetting, because I've seen posts about it and people characterizing an entire culture, an entire race for the actions of the idiotic actions of very few.
Yeah, I hear that. Jose, we hear a lot about members of the AAPI community being othered. Can you explain to everybody just what that means?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that historically, Asian people have been considered the perpetual foreigners, right? The threat of the yellow peril. There's all these, I mean, as Lisa said, words matter. And there's all these words and phrases that have gone through history throughout centuries now, where Asian people have always been seen as kind of these weird alien people coming from across the ocean, right? And so that's why, in many ways, that othering, that foreignness has been at the heart of a lot of really the hateful rhetoric that's out there. And this is why, again, we keep going back to this, but this is where if our schools are not educating our kids, then how can we educate each other? Like, what does that look like? Yeah. Right? I mean, that's a question I've been asking myself a lot in the past few weeks.
So true.
And one of the things the AAPI community continues to battle are the socioeconomic stereotypes that are placed on them. Lisa, can you explain what these are and how the stereotypes are harmful?
Well, yeah, we know how impactful media can be. And when you think about how Asians have been portrayed in the media over the years, women have often been fetishized or portrayed as being submissive or exotic, and the men are portrayed as being gangsters or emasculated and not sexy. And we know this isn't true. I mean, look at, our friends Daniel Day. Look at Jose. Hello. There's Chris Melton, Daniel Wu. Daniel Day Kim. I mean, there are a slew of the sexiest men who are Asian, but we also are, in the last couple of years, we've also seen these images of Asians who are crazy rich and who are part of bling empires. And that is just, that is just an unfair representation of the entire Asian American diaspora. When people think of the Asian American community, and I think the media contributes to this characterization as well. They think of high levels of achievement and success and education, but what most don't realize is that the wage gap between the wealthiest and the poorest Asians is the widest in the country, and more Asians live in poverty than any other minority group in New York City. And when we talk about our elders, our precious elders who have been subjected to so many acts of racism and attacks, they actually have some of the highest rates of poverty in this country. In fact, 1 in 4 Asian elders lives in poverty, and this is something that we don't hear about enough.
Yeah.
Wow. Right. Thank you for that, Lisa. Jose, speaking of stereotypes, do you feel like there's a specific type of judgment placed upon undocumented Asians in this country?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is why, 10 years ago, against the advice of like 20 immigration lawyers, I outed myself as undocumented and started an organization called Define American, precisely because undocumented Asians were excluded, and also undocumented Black people. 1 out of 10 Black American in this country is an immigrant. So undocumented
Wow.
Black, undocumented Asians, right, have been left out really of when we talk about illegal immigration in this country. So for
Yeah.
me, it's not only the stereotypes against undocumented Asians, it's the stereotype against all immigrants, right? And that's why for me, when I
Yes.
think about where we are right now, how do we actually come together? How do we acknowledge how unique our histories are and then work
Yes.
towards unity and community, right? I think to
Yes.
me, that's
So
the question.
great.
Like, how do you
True.
define American is a very provocative and a very urgent question that I think we should all be asking ourselves right now.
Yep.
Absolutely.
That's great.
Jose and Lisa, I'm curious, what can we do to help combat these stereotypes and the racism currently happening against the AAPI community? What can we do?
Well, first off, get to know more Asian people. As we've been saying over the
I love
last
that.
few minutes, the Asian community
Yeah.
doesn't consist just of Chinese and Japanese and Korean people. I mean, if you can, seek out people from Nepal or Sri Lanka or Bangladesh, or get,
Yes.
recognize the fact that Sikhs aren't Muslims, and try to just get to know and understand the
Educate yourself.
diversity that exists in the Asian American Pacific Islander community. And if you feel so compelled, read. You kind of have to dig, because again, Asian American history isn't taught in schools, but there are some incredible books out there. This is one of my favorites by the great Helen Zia. It's called Asian American Dreams. And pick up Jose's incredible book,
Yes.
Dear America, because I mean, this is the way to expand our horizons, right? And to put an end to these stereotypical ways of thinking is by educating
Yes.
ourselves to be better, and to know better.
The
Absolutely.
vice president
And
of the
then we'll
United
do
States
better.
is half Asian.
Come on
That's
now.
right.
With that.
Here we
Right
go.
there.
Step
Yes.
in. Yes, welcome
That's
to the
right.
conversation, everybody. Lisa, Jose, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. You
Thank
guys
you,
have no
guys.
idea. It's been a very rough year, and these two are part of my support group. I can call you guys at any time, and you've helped me so much, and just having you guys there allow me to have words to my emotions. So thank you for being my friend. Thank you for being friends to the show, and for being so welcoming in this conversation.